Okay, all right. Thank you very much, everybody who is here this evening. Apologies for the late start, but welcome to the second session of the Project Management Body of Knowledge 7 short course, or PMBOK, if you will, with IT Masters and Charles Sturt University, presented by the inimitable Karen Wright, who's an adjunct lecturer in project management and associated subjects at CSU with IT Masters. I'm presenting tonight from Wurundjeri Land on the Kulin Nation and pay respects to their elders, past and present, and connection to land, waters, and country. Without further ado, we would like to welcome you to the second webinar. We also would like to apologise for the delay in getting started. And so, shall we get started? Thanks very much.
We shall. Thank you very much. So thanks, guys. Last week we talked about the PMBOK7 and some of the changes that the Project Management Institute have brought about in this latest edition of their body of knowledge. And we talked through the 4 values of project management, and then we talked through the 12 principles that guide behaviour straight out of the Project Management Body of Knowledge standard. So the standard is the first part of the Project Management Body of Knowledge. We're now going to move on to the second part of the body of knowledge, which is called the guide. Okay, so there's the 2 sort of parts, the standard and the guide. There's actually a third part as well, which we're going to talk about in week 4, the last week of our short course, and that's going to be around the models and the methods and the artifacts, and really tailoring your project based on its individual needs and circumstances. So the guide and the standard, though, are things that can apply to any project, particularly the standard can be applied to any project with those 4 values and those 12 principles that guide behaviour.
Karen, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Right. My apologies. Sorry, are you able to unplug and then plug back in your headphones? I'm not sure if you did that just now or not. And just for everybody else as well, just a reminder that questions about the material that Karen is presenting can be directed to the Q&A section
I'll
of
just test
the
that
chat.
now.
That's much better, thank you. Yes, and questions about the administrative side or general discussion about the course.
Can everybody hear that now?
Yes, I can hear you, Karen. That's loud and clear. That's beautiful.
Excellent.
Thank
All right,
you.
no worries. Sorry about that.
So questions about the course itself, the course material in the Q&A, questions about the administrative side or general chat with other participants in the chat section. Thanks very much. Thanks, Karen.
No worries. Okay, so this week and next week, we're going to cover what is mentioned in the guide. So in the guide, there are 8 performance domains, and we're going to cover 4 of them in tonight's webinar, and then 4 of them in next week's webinar. So over the course of the 2 weeks, we'll cover all 8 of the performance domains, which make up the guide to the project management body of knowledge. Now, the standard and the guide overlap each other. They're meant to work together. You'll see some similarities in the performance domains if you were here in the webinar or you've watched the recording of the webinar from last week. You would notice that a lot of the principles that guide behaviour are quite relevant to the performance domains, and that's the way it's meant to be. So it's the way we behave as project managers, and this is how we want our projects to perform. And so obviously one will reflect the other. If we're behaving a certain way on our projects, then we can expect a certain performance or a certain result, is kind of the idea of the way the 2 things will fit together. So let's get started. So our 8 performance domains, I want to give you an overview of all 8 of them, and then we will focus just on the first 4 because we'll save the other 4 for next week. So these are the 8 performance domains here in the grey, and then I've put some dot points here just to give you a bit more information or a bit more context around what these performance domains are about. So first of all, we've got our stakeholders performance domain. And that is really about how the people who have an interest in the project and an influence over the project will work on the project. So this is all the functions and the activities associated with engaging those people. So it's relationship building and rapport building and that kind of thing. It fits in quite closely with the team performance domain. So we have project teams that are going to do the project work. They may also be stakeholders on the project, but stakeholders don't necessarily have to be team members. So I'll explain the difference as we go through this evening. But our team are the people who are going to be responsible for actually creating the project deliverables. So they'll work under the direction and guidance of a project manager who works under the direction and guidance of a project sponsor or a steering committee or a governance layer that we talked about in last week's webinar. So the governance personnel give us the money, the time, the resources, and in exchange for that, we lead a project team to produce a product, a service, or a result in that life cycle of a project from beginning to end. So the team performance domain is all the things that we need to do as project managers to make sure that people who are responsible for producing the project deliverables are performing really well as a team, not just as individuals. We've then got the development approach and life cycle performance domain. Now, we did talk very briefly last week about the way in which different projects are approached. We talked about the fact that, you know, project management was born out of the traditional or the waterfall approach to project management, which was really where we plan the whole project up front. So we initiate it, we kick it off, then we plan it in great detail, and then we go ahead and build our product, service, or result, do some checking and some quality testing, and then we hand it over to the person who's going to own it as an asset, then ongoing and maintain it. But there's also other ways that we can go about our project as well. We can do agile or adaptive project management, which is not like the predictive waterfall stuff. It's where we don't plan the whole project up front. We only plan a portion of our project at a time. And so we break our project into iterations, or if you're doing Scrum or one of those types of methodologies, little sprints of work. And so we just plan that little increment of work, and then we go and do that work and we deliver that part of the product, and then we go and plan the next part of the work. And so the project kind of evolves over its life cycle. So because there's more than one way to approach a project, because there's more than one way that we can get cadence or rhythm going on our project, and there are more than one there is more than one way to break the project into life cycle stages or phases. Because of that, we do need to think about how it's going to best be approached for this particular project, for this particular product that we're building. And so we have a performance domain that's dedicated to that. We've also got the planning performance domain, which is about initial planning, but also ongoing coordination to make sure that all of the elements of the project are planned. Now, even if we are going to do adaptive or agile project management, we still need to plan. A lot of people think that agile means we don't plan anything, and that's absolutely not correct. We do plan things, we just plan in smaller increments nearer to the time when the planning needs to be done. So they're the four that we're going to cover in tonight's webinar. But just for your reference, the other four are the project work performance domain, which is putting in place all of the processes, making sure we've got the adequate resources and managing them through the life cycle, and promoting a learning environment within our project and our project team. We've got the delivery performance domain, which is all about making sure we deliver to the scope of the project and that we achieve our quality objectives as we're going as well. We've got the measurement domain, which is all about making sure that what we said we were going to do in the plan is what we've actually done. So where we've got a plan that says we're going to do X, Y, Z, that we measure the results of that, and we can actually tick that off and say, yes, we have achieved that. Yes, we have done X, Y, and Z. And that we've done that to an acceptable standard or an acceptable level of performance. So that's all what measurement's about. And then we've got uncertainty, which is dealing with the risks on our project. So both the opportunities and the threats. So in project management, risk can have that dual connotation. It's not necessarily all about the bad things that might come up and stop us from achieving our project objectives, although we do keep a careful eye on that stuff. It's also about the things that potentially could go well for us, and where we might be able to seize on opportunities as the project progresses through its life cycle to do something like save money or save time or build a more robust solution or robust product. So uncertainty means keeping an eye on those unforeseen events as things, you know, unroll on the project. So there are our 8 performance domains, and as I said, we'll tackle project work, delivery, measurement and uncertainty next week, but let's get into these first 4. So I've kind of broken them into 2 lots of 4 there for you to make it nice and easy to cover. All right, so let's talk about these stakeholders. So as I mentioned, the stakeholders are the people who both have an interest in your project or have influence on or over your project, or might even be influenced by your project. So they might be people like end users, and they may not have an opportunity to influence much of the decision making during the project, but they're going to be influenced at end of the project, because they're going to end up with whatever product, service or result you create. So stakeholders are usually defined by those two kind of characteristics, both interest and influence. And the stakeholder performance domain really addresses the functions and activities that are associated with managing those people. Now, if you look back, those of you who are familiar with PMBOK version 6, version 5, version 4, you would know that stakeholders as a knowledge area of project management only really came in a couple of editions of PMBOK ago. Prior to that, there were 9 knowledge areas, and then they added stakeholder engagement in as a knowledge area because it's just so important to project management. So one of the things that we know now as project managers is that if we don't engage stakeholders from the very beginning of our project, we can end up with a situation where what we deliver is not what they want, or may not even work. And therefore, all of the time and the money and the resources that we've put into creating this product effectively become wasted. So we really need to make sure that we're giving our stakeholders the optimum opportunity to get involved in the project and to bring all of their knowledge and their skills and their information up to the project nice and early. One of the issues we can have with stakeholder engagement is when stakeholders are engaged too late, and they do have the information and they come forward with it, but it's after certain components of the product have been built, and so therefore it's of limited value. And sometimes we might even have to scrap things and start again. So in order to avoid that, we need stakeholders to speak up. Now, just because a stakeholder knows something doesn't mean that they're willing to share it. So our role here as project managers is not just to rope them onto the project and say, here's what the project's about, but it's to make sure that they understand the project, they understand their role in the project, and that they are actually willing participants. And so sometimes you'll get stakeholders on your project, and some of you may have experienced this in your careers, where they really don't want to be there, or they're quite negative about the project, or perhaps not necessarily negative about the project, and it might not be anything against you, but they're a bit change fatigued. They've kind of been through processes and changes, and they've had enough. So we've got to get a productive working relationship going with these people so that they have an opportunity to contribute actively to the project. And that way we've got to maximise our chances of getting the desired outcomes. So it is about engaging stakeholders early. And you would know yourself that if you are told by someone, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's what I want you to do, and when I want you to do it, and this is how I want you to go about it, you're probably not going to have a huge amount of interest in that task or activity because you've not had any opportunity to contribute to it. So what the stakeholder performance domain tells us is that in order to set stakeholder expectations really early on in the project, and in order to get stakeholders to really want to speak up, that we engage them nice and early, and that we get their commitment and their ownership and their support of the project. So yourself, if someone comes to you and says, look, we've got a problem, how would you like to solve that? And you have an opportunity to put in your opinion about how you think this should work and how you think it should unfold and what should happen. And if you get given the opportunity to lead that yourself and you've been part of that decision-making process, you're much more invested in the outcomes. So that's what we want. We want stakeholders that are identified really early in the project, that project team members and project managers spend time building rapport with people, that we get to know their unique characteristics and get to understand them. And I'm really glad we're doing this stakeholder performance domain along with the team performance domain tonight together, because there's lots and lots of skills that you can bring to project management that really relate well to both of these performance domains. So things like conflict resolution skills, negotiation skills, facilitation skills, it's all this leadership stuff. And it's very important to project management because, anyone can allocate resources to a task. That's pretty basic stuff. Anyone can say, look, I've got Karen for 2 days a week. I'm going to pop her on these tasks in the schedule and the work will get done. But it takes a little bit more than that to run a project, because sometimes we've got to get people to do what we want them to do, not because we've told them to, because sometimes we don't have any legitimate power to tell people what to do, but because they want to do it for us. And that's that social influence that is at the core of leadership. So we do have to build these productive relationships. We've got to get people from a wide variety of different backgrounds with different skills and different experience and different needs and different opinions to come together and work solidly on the project objectives, and make sure that as the beneficiaries of the project that they're supported and satisfied with the outcomes. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of the stakeholders are going to get what they want all of the time. we may end up with a situation where a stakeholder really, really wants something, but we can't deliver it. We just don't have the ability to be able to give them what they want. And so in those situations, I think it's good to be able to be clear about that very early on, because the more time the stakeholder has to digest that and understand that they're not exactly going to get what they want, but there's some parts of the project that will deliver things they want, then they've got a bit of time to sort of come around. And it's all about setting that expectation right from the start, nice and early, before we go too far in and people then get disappointed when their expectation level's up here and what we're delivering is going to be down here. And it's very important as well to make sure that we're not over promising our stakeholders things. We're not telling them, oh yeah, you can have that. But if you've got good relationships with your stakeholders, you can have good, frank conversations with them to say, look, I'm constrained by budget and I'm constrained by schedule here. We're just going to have to compromise on this point or that point. How do you feel about that? And try to sort of build those relationships so that you're cushioning the blow of the bad news, and matching those experiences with what you can actually deliver. So I might get to the end of the stakeholder performance domain and then ask for questions. I'll keep going with it just for now, just because I do need to talk about the importance of our stakeholders. So as I said, they play a pretty critical role in our project. They've either got an interest in the project or an influence over the project, or might even be influenced by the project outcomes. And there's different types of stakeholders as well. So we usually categorise stakeholders by internal versus external, but your organisation might have other types of stakeholder categories as well. Internal stakeholders are people that are within the organisation and within the project. External stakeholders are people outside the organisation, outside the project. And so we've got limited control over the external stakeholders. I might even say no control over the external stakeholders, but limited control over the internal stakeholders as well. So early engagement is the key to it here, to get the support, to get the ownership, to get the commitment. But then you've of course got to maintain that engagement as the project rolls along, and sometimes as the disappointment kicks in that people aren't going to get what they want. So as I mentioned before, a lot of those leadership skills like negotiation, conflict resolution, rapport building, those sorts of skills are really, really important for the project manager to have, and for project team members to have as well. So there's a couple of parts to stakeholder engagement. The first one is to identify the stakeholders. So thinking through how, where your stakeholders are coming from, whether they're internal or they're external, but really going through, the objectives of the project and think who might be influenced by this, who might be interested in this, who might be able to influence this, and really trying to come up with a list of names or roles of people that might hold a stakeholder interest, and then really talking to those people and say, do you really think you're interested in the project? Do you think you've got an influence, whatever, and really understanding, what their unique needs on the project might be. And then understanding and analysing their differing attitudes and needs. Because they're people, they're coming onto the project with different perspectives, different ideas of what they want and don't want. And so I think it would be remiss of us to just identify them and then sort of stick them all in the same bucket. They're not, they're different people, and they are going to have different attitudes and different needs. And so we really have to make the effort to get to know what makes them tick, get to know, what motivates them, what triggers them, those sorts of things. Prioritising them as well, so that the more important stakeholders are the ones that you're going to spend your time and effort on, and then really working to engage them depending on where they're at now versus where you really want them to be. So I've got a slide for that. So this is one tool you can use to work out how powerful stakeholders are and how interested stakeholders are. So power refers to influence in this particular slide, and interest is just whether or not they're interested in the project, how it affects them and whatever. So obviously not all stakeholders are equal, and you're going to spend a lot of time doing communications and stakeholder engagement. So you don't want to be spending time mucking around with stakeholders that are not that powerful and not that interested in your project at the expense of the ones who are very powerful and very interested. So we break the stakeholders into 4 quadrants here. So you see we've got the power on this, this vertical axis, we've got the interest on this horizontal axis. So low power, low interest stakeholders at the bottom here, and high power, high interest stakeholders at the top. So I would hope this person is the sponsor or the steering committee in this particular example, but let's just call them stakeholder H. We've plotted them precisely in the location that they belong, so that we can see they're very high powered stakeholders and they're also very interested in the project. I have seen project managers just lump them in the quadrant, but I like to map mine precisely because, as you can see, there's quite a bit of difference in terms of power and interest from stakeholder E to stakeholder H. But effectively what we're trying to do here is say, these are the stakeholders we want to spend most of our time and effort on. Now, it's up to you whether or not you want to show people this. It depends on your organisational culture and whether or not you think the people on your project might be offended if they see themselves down here in terms of interest or influence. So use your judgment and common sense on that one. But oftentimes I will ask someone, I will say, how interested, on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in the project? And I'm like, oh, 4. Okay, and how influential do you think you might be on the project? Oh, 4. Okay, well, that's what I had in mind too for stakeholder D, so I'm going to plot them there. And it's no surprise to anyone, that's where they go. But what we're saying here is these are the stakeholders we're going to manage really closely. These are the ones that we've got to keep satisfied because they're very powerful. They might not be that interested in the project, but they're very powerful. These are the people that we need to keep informed. They're not very powerful, but they're very interested in the project. And these are the people we've just got to monitor and keep an eye on. So these people might be accessing our website, for example, and finding out what's going on, but we're not spending oodles of time trying to get face-to-face meetings with them and things like that because they're not very interested. And even if they were, they're not very powerful anyway. So it's just a way to kind of help you prioritise where to spend your time and effort. It's not intended to be super precise. It's just intended as a guide to help you kind of put together a stakeholder engagement strategy. The other factor that the power interest graph doesn't take into consideration is engagement levels. Okay, so one of the things that we do need to consider is how supportive the stakeholder is. So they might be very powerful and very interested, but that doesn't mean they like our project or that they're going to work hard for us. So this other kind of area of engagement helps to put together a strategy for you. So it helps you to identify, this is where my stakeholder is right now. This is where I need them to be in order to be effective for my project. What are the actions or steps that I need to take? What strategy do I need to come up with to get them from there to here? So we've got our unaware stakeholders. They're people who just don't even know the project exists. They can't do a lot of damage except via ignorance, but they're certainly not out there, saying anything to anyone else about your project because they simply don't even know about it themselves. Your job is to create awareness and hopefully positive awareness about your project. So all of your strategies for your unawares need to be around, education. Resistant stakeholders are the ones who know about your project, but they don't like it. They're resistant to change either because they don't like the project, because they're change fatigued, because you're the project manager, hopefully not, but that can happen sometimes. But they're the ones that you've got to really actively work on changing their minds and get them to come around to see the project's benefits. And so they're the ones whose, the messages are going to be all about the benefits of the project and things like that. The neutral stakeholder is one who knows about your project, but they're not really supportive, but they're not resistant either. They're just a bit meh about the whole thing. If you ask them to do something, they'll probably do it, but it's not going to be, their most, stellar work. You've then got the supportive people who are aware of the project, who like the project and are supportive of the change. So you might put them, for example, with your unawares or your neutrals. And then you've got your leaders. These are the champions of the project. These are the people who are out there actively engaged in the project, wanting to make sure it's a success. You would hope that your sponsor, you would hope that your project manager, those sort of people are falling into that leading category. And you would put them with your resistors because they're the ones who are hopefully going to turn the tide on some of those negative ones. And so, some of those are the problems that you might have and getting over them, putting in place a strategy to get someone from an unaware to a neutral or a positive, or from a resistant to a neutral to a supportive, something like that. All right, so that was it for stakeholders. Should I stop there? Should we have a few questions and then we'll go on to the team performance domain, which is the second one?
Yeah, great. Sounds like a very good plan. I think that, there's a few questions here, but I would say there's a few, let's whittle some down. I believe there's a couple that are going to be answered in the next slides is why. So Kamal asks, if the end user or beneficiaries are the stakeholder, how can you best engage them during the planning of the project?
Yeah, so they are definitely a stakeholder. It depends how much power or influence they have as to how much they would be involved or how much say they would have in what the end product looks like. But they should certainly be involved to the degree of offering their requirements and things like that, which is why we need them to be, positive or supportive, even if they're not that powerful, because they are going to be the end users. And so ultimately they are going to judge whether or not they like the product.
Great, okay. Gary asks, every project involves understanding the requirements of the stakeholders, particularly those driving the project. It seems that PMBOK7 ignores the processes of eliciting and analysing requirements and the relationship between these and scope development.
Okay, so there's a pretty important line or definition between what's project management work and what's business analysis work. So there is another organisation separate to the PMI called the IIBA, which is the International Institute of Business Analysis. And they publish their own BOK, which is called the BA-BOK or the BA-BOK. And it covers in a lot of detail the elicitation of requirements and stakeholder engagement from that perspective. I think PMBOK does deliberately try not to cut their grass. I think it's important that PMBOK stays on the side of what the project manager's responsibility is. So our responsibility is overall, stakeholder engagement, where it's the business analyst who really has to do the work there in relation to the gathering of requirements. I do accept though, and this could be your point, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're saying there is that on a lot of projects, sometimes the PM has to be the BA. It's not ideal, but where there is a shortage of BAs or the organisation doesn't have one or the project's not complex enough to be deemed to need a BA, the PM has to do that work. I used to do BA work as a PM. I used to do BA work before I was a PM as well. So I had that skill set, which made it a little bit easier for me. But a lot of the time, you have to play those dual roles. And so it wouldn't hurt if you are playing those dual roles to really read the BA-BOK as well as the PMBOK.
Right, that's really, really interesting. Thank you. We've got another more practical couple of questions. I'll ask these two, and then I think perhaps we'll move on after these two. We can return to some more questions at a later part of the slideshow, the presentation. So these two, one is from Jeffrey, who asks, how often should stakeholders be attending project meetings? Can it happen that discussions become over the top of the stakeholder and they lose interest in their involvement? And then I think in combination with that is George's question, asking, how does one handle stakeholder conflict if you're a team member?
Yeah, so a couple of, very practical questions there. I think with how often to meet really depends on the project and also depends on the stage of the project as well. So if my team are right in amongst gathering requirements and working really hard to sort of sort out the nuts and bolts, I'm going to be meeting fairly frequently. But if we're in a process where, development work's going on and I only need to get the stakeholders together for a bit of user acceptance testing or whatever, then, maybe less often. And you've got to be really careful that you don't overwhelm the stakeholders. Sometimes on our projects, our stakeholders are not there all of the time, but they're only there for some of the time and they've got a regular day job as well. So we certainly don't want to be overwhelming them with project work, because they can, quite easily become quite unmotivated and not want to work on the project. So it can be a bit tough. What was the second part of that question there? Sorry.
The second question is, how does one handle stakeholders' conflict if you're a team member?
Yeah, that can be quite hard. I've got a few things in the next couple of slides just about conflict resolution. Again, this is a skill that is not unique or exclusive to project management, but really does help the project manager. So I know I'm sort of promoting the fact that you've got to be a bit of a jack of all trades, but that's kind of how it works. So, the conflict resolution skills, negotiation skills, oftentimes as a business analyst, I know this, but also as a PM, you will have people who want conflicting requirements because your stakeholders are coming at it from their own unique perspective. And so you'll have one stakeholder going into battle for the people they represent, and then another stakeholder going into battle for the people they represent. And so sometimes you do have these competing or conflicting requirements. So it is a matter of trying to kind of sort out a compromise or a solution that's going to work for everybody, and that can take a lot of time. But if you don't have conflict resolution skills, that's even tougher. So it is something to make sure that you do have before you go in there.
Great. Thanks very much, Karen. I think it's a great time to move on to your next slides as well.
Awesome. I don't want to keep everyone up all night, and I know how late we were getting started. So the team performance domain is the second performance domain out of the 8, and along very similar lines with the conflict resolution, with the leadership, with the negotiation, with the facilitation, with all of the soft leadership skills that project managers need. This is the domain that deals with the people who are going to do the work. So they are stakeholders too, in a way, in their own way, because they're having an input, they're having an influence on the project, but they may not be the end users or the people that are going to end up with the result. So I always say that all team members are stakeholders, but stakeholders are not necessarily team members as such. So what makes a person a team member is, are they doing work on the project? Are they actually, completing tasks and activities other than just having their 2 bobs worth? So this performance domain is about the activities and functions associated with people that are going to work on producing the project deliverables. So again, we have to build rapport. We have to create a team. We've got people coming from different parts of the organisation, maybe even outside the organisation. We might have external contractors, for example, that are going to come in and work with our internal team to produce that product, service or result that we want. So we've got to take this group of individuals and try to make a high-performing team out of them. I did see a coffee mug once, and it said, project manager, and then it had the Webster's Dictionary meaning, which was herder of wet cats, and I thought that was pretty apt, because sometimes it does feel like that's what we're doing, that we're trying to get everybody on the same team when not everyone wants to be on the same team. But we do have to use our leadership skills here and our other interpersonal skills to try and get this team to perform. So we'll go through some of those things. The first question is one of a technical nature, and it's, what sort of structure are you planning to use? So different projects have got different methods that we're going to use, and we'll talk about the life cycle and development approach in a moment in terms of whether we're going to use a predictive approach or an adaptive approach. But we can also structure our project team in 3 different kind of key ways as well. So sometimes we'll have functional project teams. So the functional project team is one where we're drawing people from the business onto the project. So these people usually have day jobs that they do, and they're on the project for a portion of their time, and they report to the project manager for the tasks and activities that they're going to complete on the project, but they still continue to report to their line manager or day-to-day supervisor as well. Now, what's good about that from the project manager's perspective is that you don't have to worry about hiring and firing people, and you don't have to worry about, too much about the performance management and the approval of leave and things like that. Where it's not so great, though, is that you don't have any legitimate power over these people. And sometimes you might say, Karen, I've got a job for you on Monday. And she'll say, well, I'm going to be away on Monday. And you go, oh, since when? And my supervisor signed off on my leave request. Okay, great. So you lose a little bit of control in a functional structure. And you do have people that are trying to wear different hats and, come onto the project part of their time, do their role and go. Now, most of the time they are, hardworking, dedicated and knowledgeable and experienced people, and that's great, but sometimes you will have some problems with performance management on the project, and you don't really have any other choice but to go and speak to that person's supervisor if you're having issues. We then have the projectize structure, which is really about all of the people on the project team belonging to the project. So it's sort of a separate bubble that sits out the side of the organisational structure, and all of the people on that project report to the PM. What's great about that is that you hire who you want. What isn't so great about that is all the people management stuff that comes along with managing people. Then we've got matrix structures, and matrix structures are in the middle. So we've got a bit of both going on. We've got some project staff that are dedicated to the project, like we might have a BA and a solutions architect or whatever. And then we've also got some functional people there that are there to do a role or whatever from the business as well. What can help you work out the ideal structure for your project are things like org charts, position descriptions, doing a bit of networking, aka poaching, working out, organizational policies and procedures and theories around different things, using your own expert judgment and knowledge of the organisation and knowledge of people, and of course meetings as well can be a useful way to determine what structure is best. Ultimately, the governance layer will determine the structure, but they will usually do so on the basis of having considered what the project manager seems to think is a good idea as well. So you usually have a fair bit of say around the structure, but probably not the ultimate say. The other thing that is really good to do when you've got your team together is provide them with some dedicated roles and responsibilities. I think it's pretty much common sense, but what we don't want happening on our project is two people working on one task while nobody's working on something else. What we really need to do is make sure that everyone has their tasks and activities, that they know what they are, they know how to perform them, they've got the skills, they've got the knowledge, they've got the experience, and we're leaving capable people to do their work, and we're just sort of checking to see where they're up to from time to time. So the RACI matrix works on the idea that we need a responsible person, which is a person who's going to do the work, or responsible people who are going to do the work if they're working in a small sub-team. We also need an accountable person. So we need someone with whom the buck's going to stop. So in the event that something's not done, who do I go and knock on the door of? We also need to consult with people. So there are some tasks and activities where certain people might need to come to an agreement with us, and that the consultation is that two-way process of, I'm not just going to tell you the way it is, I'm going to get your input. And then there's also people we do need to inform. So they are people who we are just going to tell, this is what's happened here, just to let you know. And so that's that one-way communication. So by doing a RACI matrix, what you're doing is you're working out the tasks and activities in your project, and then across the top here you've got all of the different major stakeholders or team members in your project, and you're saying who's going to be responsible, who's going to be accountable, who's going to be consulted, and who's going to be informed. Now this is one that's not completely filled out because we haven't got an A and we haven't got an R in some of these, and we do definitely need to have someone who's going to be responsible and accountable for each of these tasks and activities. But you go through and you complete it in consultation with the person themselves. So this person here, manager A, they know they're going to be consulted about all of these things, they know they're going to be informed about this thing, and they know they're going to be consulted about these three things down here. I'm the PM, so I know I'm going to be responsible for these things. The sponsor knows they're going to be accountable for these things. The client knows they're going to be consulted about these things. So it's a really good way of just making sure that everyone knows what their job is on the project, and that can help sort of overcome any conflicts as well. Some other considerations are, thinking about whether or not the people that are on your project team actually have the skills and qualifications and experience to be able to do the job you want them to do. One of the things that you can do with your project team is a bit of a skills analysis. You don't need to do this in any kind of formal manner. You can just take them out for a cup of coffee and say, look, what are you hoping to bring to the project? Have you done this kind of work before? What do you think your key challenges are going to be on the project? So just keep it nice and light. So people can say, oh, look, I've worked on a project like this before, or no, I haven't. I've never worked on a project like this before. I'm really worried about it. So you can see where they might have some developmental needs, and you can work on a bit of a strategy in the background. If it's a functional type structure, you'd work on that strategy with that person's day-to-day supervisor. If it's a projectized structure, then it'd just be you, okay? Tuckman talks about the stages of team development. I will warn you, this is old research. It's not common for university lecturers to talk about research from the 50s, but old Tuckman came up with a model for team development that applied to general management back in the day. But I think human nature hasn't changed all that much. People haven't changed all that much. And so this is very relevant to project management because we do have that definite beginning and that definite end with our project work. And Tuckman talks about forming, which is the first stage of a project, the ice-breaking kind of stage where people are coming together, they don't really know each other, and they're just sort of getting their feet. Storming, where people are starting to get to know each other and they're starting to put their opinions forward, and that causes a little bit of conflict and people start to work out who they like and don't like on the project team. Norming is where everyone kind of just starts to fall into a pattern and they start working, reasonably effectively, but, not at full capacity yet because they're not that familiar with their job roles. And then you get to performing, which is where everybody's humming along nicely. Everyone's understanding of their roles and responsibilities. They're all following the team values and the team behaviours, and everything's, working along really nicely in harmony. Unfortunately for us, we have adjourning as well, which is, that very end of our project where our project is disbanded, and oftentimes people either have to go back to their old jobs or they have to go on to new jobs, or they're leaving the organisation because the project's over. And so you might think I'm a bit silly about saying this, but a lot of people grieve the end of a project. They've come to work every day for 6 months or 12 months and they've really enjoyed the people that they've worked with, and there is that sense of celebration at the end. We've delivered an awesome result and it's been fantastic, but there is also sometimes that sort of slight sadness about, oh, project's over now and I have to go back to where I was before. The other part of grief that project managers have to get people through is sometimes when the project's cancelled. So sometimes we adjourn not because we've achieved our successful outcome, but because our project's been canned. And that can be really tough for people too, because they've just put in 6 months or 12 months worth of work and it's amounted to what they deem to be nothing. And the organisation's changed its mind or changed its strategy or whatever, and the project's just been closed out. And so you do have a role to play there in working with people to get them to accept that and to grieve through that process. So don't ever try to do that on your own. It's a bit of a HR partnered job, but it is one of the things that we have to be good at as well. So again, it's one of those things about project management. You have to have skills from all these different areas. So these are some of the skills that you'll need: communication skills, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, negotiation, influence, team building skills, and group facilitation skills. All right, the next slide gets into the life cycle phases and the development approach. I might just keep going because of the time and then kind of circle back at the end for questions, Jack. Is that okay?
I think that's a great idea. Yep, not a problem.
Yeah, I just don't want to keep people up too late at night. And we can always take questions as well, that I can answer at the end if people want to hang around for that. But the life cycle is the stages or the parts that the project's broken up into. So obviously we're going to deliver a product, service or result, but the life cycle is, what happens in between that start and that end. Because we've got some options about the way we deliver our project. When I talk about cadence, I'm talking about the rhythm, the timing and the frequency of the deliverables as they, hit the, or as they're handed over. So obviously in a waterfall or a traditional project, the cadence is we plan everything up front, we deliver the whole lot at once at the end. But with an agile project, what's the timing of those deliverables? How frequently are we going to hand stuff over? Because we build a minimum viable product, but then we add things on as we go through the life cycle. So cadence becomes particularly important in agile projects. So this is a sample predictive life cycle. So this is this waterfall, and you can see why we call it waterfall, okay? Because we have our feasibility and then our design and then our build and then our test and then our deployment and then our close off, okay? But we also have something called the adaptive approach, which is the agile approach. It's where we're doing all the same things, but we're just doing them more frequently and in shorter bursts than a predictive or waterfall project. So this is where we have increments that are going to deliver value, and a self-managed team that kind of does that work. So iteration 1, we plan it, we deliver it, we hand it over. And then we get some feedback on that through a review and a retrospective process, and then we go and do our next iteration. Okay, and then we deliver some more stuff and then our next iteration. So cadence refers to the rhythm of these circles, all right, how big they are and how frequently they get repeated, all right. We also have something called a hybrid approach, and a hybrid approach is very popular in a lot of organisations now. So what a lot of organisations are saying is that we don't want a predictive approach and we don't want an adaptive approach. We want the bits of the predictive approach that work for us and we want the bits of the adaptive approach that work for us. And so what they're doing is they're sort of smashing it up and coming up with a bit of a best of breed and taking the parts that work best for the project out of both types of project management approaches. When deciding which approach to choose, it can be complex. And again, your governance personnel are going to be the people that have got the ultimate say here. A lot of organisations say, we're a Prince 2 shop, that's all we do here. And, you know, you have to manage a project Prince 2. Okay, no worries. Some organisations will say, we do Scrum here. Okay, we do Scrum. But some organisations will say, you can choose the approach that you think is going to best work for this particular project. So what do you think? Now, the approach that you're going to choose will depend on the product, service or result you're creating. So I think we talked about some examples of that last week where we talked about, you know, if you're constructing a house, then, you know, you need to do all your planning before you start. You can't just, you know, lay a slab and then go, oh, gee, I might add another bedroom over here. And I just think, I really think it'd be nice if it was 2-story because, you know, you haven't got the foundations for that. Whereas something like, you know, developing an iPhone, if you planned everything to the nth degree, by the time you got to developing it and rolling it out, it would already be obsolete. So something like that is perfect for the incremental approach. The other factors are the project itself and its stakeholders. How advanced are they? How mature are they in relation to project management? If I tried a hybrid approach where I took the best of this one and the best of that one, would they understand it enough? Funding availability and schedule constraints, and the organisation itself, its culture, its structure, and so on. So there's some of the things we take into consideration. So the development approach and lifecycle performance domain really addresses these functions. It talks about how we're going to go about the development, what stages we're going to use, what rhythm and timing we're going to use, and how we're basically going to break up the project in between its start and finish. So, you know, obviously we need a development approach that's going to be consistent with the product and the deliverables that we're creating. And we need a project lifecycle approach that's going to consist of phases that are going to deliver value for the customer and the stakeholder between the beginning and the end. And in fact, you'll note that some projects actually have payments attached to lifecycle phases. So a house build would work that way, for example. If anyone's ever built a house, they would know that they had to make progress payments to the builder. So they made a payment when the slab went down, they made a payment when it was at lock-up stage, and then they might have made another payment at fit out, and then another payment at completion. Right, and it might have been 25% each time, or it might have been different increments depending on how much work was done within each of those phases. So, you know, because the handover of certain products or certain results means value to the customer, oftentimes they pay us that way as well. So the project lifecycle will consist of phases that will facilitate that approach and, you know, is the best approach for that particular project. So it's a bit of a complex decision as to which way you would go. And again, you know, it's up to your governance layer to really kind of work on that and help make the decisions. And our last one is planning. So understanding how we're going to deliver the project, making sure that the execution is nice and smooth, and we've got a really nice benchmark that we're going to use to compare our performance as well. So we're going to use what we put in this plan today as our benchmark for success when it comes to the measurement performance domain later. Right, so we shouldn't be putting things in the plan that we don't intend to deliver. So the planning performance domain is what you guys would usually associate with the project processes themselves. So building the budget, building the schedule, doing a scope management plan, doing a quality management plan, gathering the requirements, all of that stuff is planning. Whether you're doing it up front for the whole project or you're just planning a sprint or an iteration of work in an agile project. So it's all about the functions associated with the initial, ongoing and evolving organisation and coordination that is necessary to deliver the product, service or result. So it's the planning has a kind of a twofold process or purpose. One purpose is obviously to give us a benchmark against which to compare our performance, but also the primary purpose of planning is to guide our efforts. It's so our team knows what we're going to deliver and what we're not going to deliver. It's so the team have got a schedule to stick to and got a budget to adhere to and understand what the requirements are. So you can't build something or create something unless you know what it is. And the planning process is valuable for giving us that. And then, of course, it is valuable, as I said, as a benchmark for comparing performance as well. So we need to put a lot into the planning process. And, you know, I've got lots of slides on this deck that are going to be able to be viewed by you after the webinar. But I just want to sort of cover on some of the main ones now before we wrap up. One of the main things that you will need in the planning process or the planning performance domain is a business case. So the business case is a very early document that really gives the upshot of the project. It talks about the background, why we're doing it. You know, if we think of projects as a vehicle to deliver strategic change for an organisation or to deliver value, then, you know, should we proceed or not proceed? It's really weighing up the options. You know, oftentimes we've got more than one choice available to us. You know, to do it or not do it is sort of two choices on their own. But then if we are going to do it, maybe we've got option A, option B and option C. And what a business case does is weigh up the costs and the risks of doing the project or doing the different options of the project versus the benefits and the value that it will hopefully create. So it provides this justification for the project that someone, you know, who's senior in the organisation, perhaps a project control board, are going to sit there and look at all the business cases that come forward for consideration and look at how they all align to the organisational strategy and decide which of these projects is going to get the go-ahead and proceed to further planning, or which of these projects is really not a good idea for this organisation, or maybe a good idea but just not now. Maybe we've got other pressing priorities. So the business case is that sort of decision to proceed or not proceed and weighs up the options. We've then got a scope. Okay, so the scope is the boundaries of the project. It's what we will do and what we won't do. We've got to also be very careful that we list the exclusions. So these are the things that we're not going to do, not just the things that we are going to do. And the reason for that is because we don't want anyone to think we've just omitted something. All right, so there's a very big difference between a scope exclusion, which is I've considered it and I don't want to do it, versus an omission, which is, did she even consider that? Because it's not even here. All right, so I like to make sure that I've listed my exclusions very carefully and that, you know, I've got a really clear set of requirements that go with that I can use as a project baseline that can help me then avoid, you know, future scope creep. A lot of people think scope change is a bad thing. Scope change is not necessarily a bad thing. We can change the scope of our project if we get permission to. And in fact, sometimes it's necessary to change the scope of our project to make it a more relevant and better performing project. However, we don't want to just go and change our scope, you know, on its own. That's scope creep. If it's unauthorized and uncontrolled, it's just scope creep. We want to make sure that we are going through a proper change control process and that any changes to the scope are approved by the governance layer. So I want to talk about work breakdown structures. Work breakdown structures are where we take the scope of the project and we decompose or sort of break down each of the deliverables of the project into smaller and smaller tasks and activities. And we get to something at the bottom called the work package, which is you know, all of the tasks and activities that need to be completed in order to achieve a deliverable. And so it's quite a process. I would encourage you to find out more about doing work breakdown structures. It can take a bit of practice to get them right, but it is important to decompose all of your deliverables into individual tasks and activities so that you know what the project is about, and then you'll be able to go through and you know, do things like develop your project schedule and so on as well. I think I might pull up there, Jack, and just sort of see if there's questions in relation to any of the team performance stuff, any of the development and life cycle stuff, and any of the planning stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few questions. So we've got, here's one from Jessica asking, in the long run, functional structure creates silos while matrix structure creates networked model. Can you share examples of what kind of work or product best fits each structure?
It really does depend on the project and what you're trying to achieve. I do agree that functional structures can create the silos because people are working on the project in the business and they're in their own their own little area of the organisation, and a lot of projects like that don't get traction outside that area of the organisation because nobody knows about it. Everyone who's working on the project is working in their functional area and they're all just talking amongst themselves about the project. And that can be kind of unfortunate. Whereas the matrix structure does enable some cross-pollination in the organisation, so that people are more aware of the project and know what's going on. I think the golden rule is you don't want stakeholders that are on the project if they don't need to be there. So if it is a project that is going to be run within one part of the organisation and it's not going to have any impact on any other parts of the organisation, which would be a pretty rare thing, but it can happen, then that's fine. You just stick with your functional structure because it would be nice and efficient to keep everybody in-house. You're adding extra complexity when you're bringing people in from the outside, but you do get that benefit of that cross-pollination. I think if you want people to accept your product and you want to run a well integrated project and a well-integrated organisation, it's good for the left hand to know what the right hand's doing. And so in those cases, a project, for example, a payroll project, you might go, well, that's just HR. We don't need to involve anybody else, or, it might be your finance department that does payroll. So you'd say, well, it only needs to stay within the payroll people. No one else needs to know. But when you think about it like that, there's lots of people that are going to have input into that. Every line manager and every supervisor who's going to, approve people's timesheets really needs to have a say in that. So if they don't even know the project's going on, how are they going to, effectively participate in that? So that would be an example of a project, I think, where you need stakeholders from other areas of the organisation, even if they're just there to provide that kind of channel of communication back to the line managers in their area to say, this is the new payroll system that's coming out. This is how we're going to approve people's timesheets. Does this work for us or not? Those sorts of things.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, in RACI or RACI terms, who is responsible for the business case, project manager or sponsor?
So the accountable party is always the sponsor because the buck stops with them. They're the person who's going to use that business case to make a decision, but it's often the project manager who's responsible for developing it. So we would develop it within the project team. Sometimes though, and I don't want to confuse anyone, but sometimes project managers are brought on to the project after the business case has already been done. So someone else in the organisation's done the business case, the sponsors approved it, it's become a project, and then it's been handed to a project manager. So you in effect don't have any input into the business case. You've just got the outcome of it, which is a decision to go ahead with option B, for example.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. And as large projects can have multiple groups working together, how would the project manager or managers, or who, if not the project managers, manage team expectations and get the team members on side to produce an optimum result?
So it's interesting because it depends on the development approach that you're using. One of the things that agile methods promote very heavily is a self-managed team. That there's an idea that really, people don't need to be led as such. They should be able to lead themselves. And so, depending on the organisation's level of maturity, that may work in some organisations, but it could be really, really difficult in others as well. Where you've got large numbers of people, it's always the project manager who is the team leader. Particularly in a traditional waterfall project or a Prince 2 type project where you've got that predictive life cycle approach. It's the project manager, and then reporting up to if you've got issues with individual team members, if you're running a functional structure and you've got issues with individual team members, you talk to that person first, and if you don't get any joy there, you go and talk to their supervisor or their day-to-day manager and say, look, Karen's on my project, she's not doing anything. I've had a chat to her about it, she's still not doing anything, what can I do? Ultimately, you can also go to your sponsor or steering committee, your governance layer as well, and say, look, I've got some people on my project team that aren't performing. I've tried to counsel them, I've tried everything to support them. And it could be not that the person's not great at their job, they just might be overwhelmed. In a functional structure, it's not uncommon to see people on 5, 6, 7 projects. And it just means that they're just exhausted and spread too thinly. I think that's probably the number one issue with resources in organisations these days, is that they're put on too much, and so that might be why they're not performing. So you might see if you can swap that person out for someone who's less kind of spread thinly across the organisation.
Great, thanks so much. We've got a question about outside MS projects and other commercial softwares (brackets YouTube noisemakers). What reliable tool can one use for work breakdown structures?
Oh, there's heaps. There's lots. Look, when I'm teaching project management to people who've not done work breakdown structures before, I actually don't use any kind of software. I use sticky notes and a pen. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I tend to write a task and activity, to one task or activity per sticky note, and pop it up on a big wall somewhere. And then I'll go and do it in Visio or something like that, where I'll just, go and pick it off. But or I use MS Project. To be honest, I'm a big fan of it, because it's one of the things that I think is, I'm a consultant, so I work for lots of different organisations, and it seems to be the one that most people know. But if I go into an organisation and they want me to use something in particular, I'll use it. They're pretty much all similar anyway. But if I'm working with a quite inexperienced project team, then I like to use the Kmart sticky notes, or the Officeworks sticky notes, and pop them up on the wall.
So you'd say the software would be Kmart or Officeworks then?
No, whatever software you like. There's lots of free versions of different things out there, and people are quite visual. They like to see things visually. So yeah, I wouldn't make a recommendation on any particular software.
Great. Okay. I think those are probably most of the ones that are relevant for what you've just requested. So feel free to continue on, and then we can circle back to some more of these at the end of the session.
No worries. So most of the slides that I have from here were just in relation to and this is probably the only other slide that I kind of wanted to cover tonight. There's a lot of detailed slides about, developing schedules and things like that. But suffice to say, this is the main part of the planning that you've got to focus on. You will do things like a human resource plan. You will do a communications plan. You'll do a stakeholder engagement plan. But this triple constraint or iron triangle of project management, it used to just be scope, time and cost. And then, people wised up to the fact that if we didn't deliver a quality outcome, the whole lot of the rest of it was a bit of a waste of time. But what we do have to do here as the start of our project planning process is really get the scope right. So we've really got to define very carefully what's in and what's out. What are we doing? What are we not doing? What are the boundaries of this project? So once we've got a business case confirmed, we've really got to work on, creating a scope management plan and say, if this is the scope of the project and if you want to change it, what will that process look like? Oh, well, we'll do a change request and we'll submit it to the sponsor, and the sponsor will either approve it or reject it. Okay, perfect. We then go and gather some quality requirements. So this is a matter of talking to our stakeholders and working out what it is they want the project to be able to do, or the product to be able to do and deliver. And then we try and align that as best we can with a schedule and a budget. We try to say, okay, well, what can we do within the time frame we've got? What can we do within the money that we've got? And that's why we call it the triple constraint, because we can change these elements, but we've got to keep them in balance. So if I say to you, I want to build a 3-bedroom house on a block of land, on the outskirts of Melbourne, you might say, okay, well, you're going to need 5 months and you're going to need, $500,000 for a block of land and another $500,000 to build a house. Perfect. Wonderful. Job's done. But then if I say to you, look, I want a really big block and I want a tennis court and I want a swimming pool, and I'd really, really love a jacuzzi out the back, and I'd love, first-class landscaping, etc. I'm adding to the scope and the quality requirements of my project. So obviously I can't do that for the original schedule and the original budget. So what I need to do is enhance these to match this. And the reverse can also happen. So as the project is unfolding, sometimes we are starting to run out of time through sometimes no fault of our own, or run out of money. Again, through sometimes no fault of our own. So the only choice we can have then is to go to our project sponsor and say, I need more money, I need more time, and see what they say. Sometimes they'll say yes, because they might see the benefit in it. But sometimes they might say no. They might say, look, if I'd have known it was going to cost this much money and take this much time, I never would have approved the business case in the first place. So no, no go. So you then only have one choice, and that is to go back here and start throwing things out of the boat. So you either have to reduce your scope or reduce your quality requirements, or both, so that the time, the cost, and the scope and quality line up together. So if you get this bit as kind of the basis of your plan, the rest of it then will fall into place. So as I said, based on this, you can then start to work out your procurement. Based on this, you can start to work out things like, you know, your communications and your risk management and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But I do want to say that project planning is a very iterative process. You don't just go and develop a scope and gather some quality requirements, size it up for time and money and go, boom, here it is, here's your plan. Very often we have to tweak and change things, because when we first learn about our project, even if it's an agile project, we usually don't know much about it. And as it starts to unfold, the answers start to become a little bit clearer about what we're going to need. So after we've done our work breakdown structure, we've got to have a bit more of an idea as to the tasks and activities involved. After we've done our quality requirements, we're going to have a bit more of an idea as to how much money we're going to need to be able to achieve that level of quality. So I'd recommend that you try to approach it in a kind of a scope comes first. Scope is king, is the saying in project management, and quality requirements, and then try and sort of fit that to your schedule and your budget. And you've got to try and work it a bit to try and make it all sort of come together. If that makes sense. And then ultimately it's up to your project sponsor or steering committee to sign off on it all. But that then gives you not only, as I said before, the guidance for your project team to adhere to along the way, but also gives you the benchmarks for what you're going to be measuring your performance against as well. So, you know, whenever we look at the performance of our project, our first question is, are we still within the scope of the project? That should be a yes at all times. You know, are we delivering to the quality standards we'd hope to? That should also be a yes at all times. Are we, you know, on track for schedule? Hopefully that's a yes as well. And, you know, are we on track for money, or have we overspent? And hopefully, you know, we haven't. So that sort of becomes the crux of our plan, that then the rest of the sub plans kind of hang off, like the human resource plan and the communications plan and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But I can talk more about, you know, that sort of thing next week when we talk about the other 4 performance domains. But the way I like to think about is do you want it good? Do you want it fast, or do you want it cheap? Because you can't have all 3, so you've got to make some choices. And that's it from me, guys. Any questions? Any further questions?
Yep, so we've got just 2 further questions for the very end of it, and I'd ask everybody to please hold any other questions. If you've got more to discuss, please let us know via the forums in learn.itmasters.edu.au, where you'll be able to access the full recording as well as all of the slides that are available and any additional resources. So Lawrence asks, how does one grow the level of engagement with stakeholders, particularly the end users / beneficiaries? I've seen a lot of misalignment leading to overall project failure, and I've seen quote unquote project managers cooking reports to suit a better narrative. How can we play a significant role to ensure alignment between perceived value and delivered value?
Yeah, look, start early and go often is my advice there. So as I sort of said before, we've got to really engage stakeholders nice and early, give them a voice, give them an opportunity to come forward, but really make it clear what their role is on the project. You know, there are sometimes some very disappointing things that can happen on projects where, you know, we've really got a great stakeholder who wants to be involved, has got great ideas and fantastic vision, and you put those ideas to your sponsor and steering committee and they just go, no, we're not interested in that. And you know, you think, oh gosh, you know, like you're just not. But I guess it's frustrating, but we've got to remember what our role is, and our role is to cater to the wishes of our sponsor and steering committee. They might know things that we don't, but you know, it can be frustrating. I agree, when you've got you know, a stakeholder that's really got great ideas and they don't seem to be able to get any traction. I think the best thing to do there is to really engage them early, give them a voice, you know, get them to, sometimes stakeholders have got a great idea, but they just don't have the voice to be able to get it out into the rest of the organisation. So think outside the box in terms of ways that you might be able to help them with that and help them spread their message a bit further. Think about, you know, the people that might have the most influence and how you might be able to bend their ear a little bit. Unfortunately, projects are sometimes quite political, which can be frustrating as well. But yeah, definitely start the engagement early and try to think about ways that you can leverage the powerful people in your power interest graph to try and get what you need out of them.
Fantastic answer. Thank you very much. And then just one small final question. Again, all additional questions can be directed to the forums, which Hannah has helpfully linked several times in the chat at learn.itmasters.edu.au, along with the slides and the recordings from tonight. Carlos asks, what is the main difference between project manager and program manager in relation to stakeholders?
So programs are just multiple projects that are delivered together. So a project is that single endeavour that has a definite start and a definite end date. So it's a unique endeavour that's undertaken in order to create, a temporary endeavour that's undertaken in order to create a unique product, service or result. So definite start, definite end date, and will produce a unique product, service or result. A program is where we couple or join two or more projects together, because by delivering them together, we're going to get a greater benefit than if we had delivered them separately. So a program might be 2 projects or 3 projects or 5 projects or 10 projects that are put together because they're going to create a benefit. It might be a savings benefit, it might be a time benefit, it might be, a quality benefit, but whatever the benefit is, what we're doing when we do that is we're adding an extra layer of complexity to the process, because now we don't just have 2 single project managers, we've also got a program manager that sits over top of that. And so the individual stakeholders for each of the projects can overlap, and I think this is where your question is coming from. So we've got project A, project B, project C, they're all running together as program number 1. Well, project A is going to have its own unique set of stakeholders, and project B is going to have its own set of unique stakeholders, and project C is going to have its own unique set of stakeholders as well. But some of those projects might, some of those stakeholders might actually be, kind of relevant to more than one of those. So one might be, for example, a stakeholder that's relevant to project A and project C, but not project B. So the program manager obviously deals with the stakeholder relationships at a higher level. They deal with the ones that are relevant to all of the projects across the program, but the individual project managers within the program also have to take responsibility for their individual stakeholders as well. It just needs to be a very coordinated approach, because we can't have a situation where one stakeholder has been given 2 different messages by 2 different project managers. So the program manager is responsible for making sure that approach is consistent across all of the projects.
Great. That is the end of our questions. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you everyone who stuck around. Apologies again for the late start and the technical difficulties, but all the additional information will be available, the slides, the recording, and any other additional resources at learn.itmasters.edu.au, and everyone is able to access those and the forums just by going there. Thank you very much, Karen, for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Hannah, for the tech side. Hannah working hard on the tech support side as well this evening in particular. Once again, thank you everybody for coming. The next round of these courses, the next week, will be next week on Thursday at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, or the equivalent of that in your time zone, once again. And we will endeavour to start on time. Hopefully the computers decide not to betray us next week. So thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye. See you next week.